Now, growing up, one of the quotes that impacted my life deeply was a quote by D.L. Moody. The world is yet to see what God can do through one man who is fully yielded to him. Back in the 1940s, there was a Bible school, and there was a professor who was teaching his students about revivalists and reformists. He was talking about all the revivalists who had lived in history and how they shaped Christianity. And they came to an interesting part in their class where he got to take his students to one of the homes of a revivalist. So one day he gathered all the students and says, today we're going to go visit the house of John Wesley, he said. Students were excited because they had read about John Wesley in their textbook, learned about his influence. And John Wesley lived in the 1700s, one of the most powerful revivalists, and through whom God brought about a shaking revival in the nation of England. During John Wesley's time, thousands upon thousands of people came into the kingdom of God through his ministry. John Wesley was incredibly passionate to preach the gospel. He would wake up in the early morning before dawn at 4 o'clock, get on his horse, and he will ride that horse town after town, village after village, preaching the gospel all the way up till the nighttime. And by the time the day was over, he would have preached from 18 to 36 places in one day. And he would do this every single day, and until he saw an incredible revival in England. So the students were extremely excited when they got to go see John Wesley's house. So the teacher brought them into the house and showed them the living room. He said, here's the living room. This is where John Wesley entertained people when they came into their home. This is where the people sat and talked to John Wesley. The students were like, wow, it's so cool. We're standing in John Wesley's living room. He said, come, let me show you. The next, he took them to the dining room and said, look, this is where John Wesley sat every morning. Before he'd get on his horse and before he'd ride off, he'd eat breakfast here. And this is how he started his day. And they all looked at it and said, this is incredible. We're standing in John Wesley's dining room. Then he said, come on, I'll take you to his prayer room. And he took them to the prayer room. And the students stood there in awe as they looked at a wall filled with books, different theological books that John Wesley would study, and his table and chair which he would sit and prepare his sermons. And they're like, oh, it's incredible to stand in John Wesley's study. And then the professor said, I'll take you to another room. Come on. He took him to John Wesley's bedroom. It's a small room. All the students kind of squeezed around the bed, and they stood there, and the teacher said, this is John Wesley's bedroom. After a long day, he'd come here and he'd rest. This is where he'd sleep. And as he was explaining it, one student stopped the teacher and said, sir, what's that on the floor? I see 2 indents by the bed. And the teacher kind of chuckled and says, that's important, he said. He said, that's where John Wesley would wake up every morning and kneel down by his bed. And for hours, he would pray for the revival of England. Every morning, he'd wake up and he would kneel by the side of his bed and he would pray that God would visit the nation of England. And the students were awed because where he had knelt all those years had actually caused indentations on the floor. And there was 2 little, indentation of knees where John Wesley would kneel every day. Students were awed by it. The teacher said, okay, come on, let's get back on the bus. We're going to go visit some more homes. So they all got back on the bus, about to leave. The teacher realizes one student is missing. So he says, hey guys, hold on, let me go find this guy. Comes back into John Wesley's house, looks in the living room, no one. Dining room, nothing. Goes to the study, nothing. And then he goes up the stairs, and as he's coming up close to the bedroom, you can see a student kneeling by the side of the bed. And he's praying. Tears running down his eyes. The teacher was moved. He didn't want to interrupt the prayer of the student. So he kind of gently came and stood in that bedroom by the side of that bed. And he could hear the student praying. And the student was praying, weeping, and he's saying, do it one more time, Lord. Do it one more time in my generation, like you did at John Wesley's time. Do it one more time. Then he said, Lord, do it one more time through me. Make me like you made John Wesley and used me. And he was weeping and praying, and this teacher stood there moved for a few minutes. And after a while, the teacher said, okay, patted the shoulder of that student, said, come on, it's time to go. And then that student named Billy Graham stood up from that place and walked back to the bus to join all the other students that day. God heard the prayer of Billy Graham that day, and through him made a mighty move that had never been seen by our day and our generation. Thousands upon thousands of people who came into the kingdom of God because one man knelt down and said, Lord, do it. Do it through me. Do it again. And I'm telling you, my friend, unless the church comes to that place of just that yearning and says, Lord, may our lives not be lived for ourselves and for our own pleasures, but please extend our territory, extend the influence in our nation, that your kingdom would be built through whatever we do, whatever is in our hands, let it be used for the extension of the kingdom. The 1.4 billion people in our nation who are lost, who still need Christ, may I be that person. May I be that person through whom the gospel is preached. May I be that person who made myself available to the purposes of God, that I lived in my day and my generation. Let it not be said that I went down silently and did nothing for God, but let it be said that I was part of a generation that stood up and said, I am not going down silent. Come what may, I'm going to make my life matter. I'm going to make my life count for the kingdom of God. I have only one life to live, and I'm going to give it to the kingdom of God and for the purpose of God, that whatever I have, let it be used for the kingdom of God. I'm telling you, church, until we become a generation like that says, Lord, make it so that in our day and our generation, that you would use our voice, you would use our influence, you would use our position for the kingdom of God. What God did through Jabez, he can do it through you. What God did through John Wesley, he can do it through us. What God did through Billy Graham, he can do it through us. All it takes for people, men and women, who position themselves in a place of availability and said, God, I want my life to matter. I don't want to live it for myself. I want to live it for the kingdom of God and for the purposes of the kingdom of God.